Greetings, fellow humans. Welcome to the Vassals of Kingsgrave, an offshoot of a podcast of Ice and Fire. Today we're going to be discussing the first two seasons of Netflix and Wonderstorm's animated series, The Dragon Prince. Please be aware of spoilers for the series, as well as potential spoilers for Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, everything George R. R. Martin's ever written, and other fantasy properties that you probably should have read or watched already. I'm not judging you, I'm just saying. I'm Michal, I go by inkasrain on the podcast of Ice and Fire forums, and I'm joined by Adam.
Hey, this is Adam, drownedsnow on the forums.
Bina.
Hey everyone, this is Bina 007 on the forums.
Paul.
Hey, this is Small Paul, SerDinnerRoll on the forums.
Sarah.
Hi, this is Sara, DrBlood on the forums.
And Zach.
Hi, this is Zach, also known as Alias on the forums.
So, I think we should start with jelly tart ratings. It's very nice that they gave us like the easiest possible substitute for lemon cakes, I think. Let's see. Paul, since I always forget you, why didn't you start?
Well, great. The one time I wanted to be forgotten. Jelly tart rating, I'm going to say 4 out of 5. There are certain bits where the series gets a little slow, and it is a children's series, so as much as I might be like, ooh, I'm super invested in these characters, it sometimes kind of runs the gambit of also doing like the classic kids television trope and like the basic like, oh, Ezrin says something but Callum doesn't believe him, but in the end Callum believes him, that kind of thing. But overall, excellent storytelling, great characters that are just really endearing, and a very kind of big issue look that is very reminiscent of Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I'll say 4 out of 5.
Awesome. Sarah, why don't you go next?
Okay. Sorry, I just want to make sure I would give it 4.75 out of 5. Only because I felt like the first season was amazing, and the second season I really, really enjoyed as well, and there was a lot to it, but just not quite as much as there was originally. And I understand that we're in the middle of what's clearly been envisioned as a pretty serious arc overall, but I thought that the season arc was stronger in the first season than it was in this one. So that's a quarter of a jelly tart off for me, but overall I'm a big fan. So
interesting. Adam, how about you?
I'll go with like a 4.25. The end of season 2 was a bit of a downer, which again, I know, like, I'm sure season 3 is like a month away the way Netflix does things, so it's probably not that big of a deal. But season 2, I just wish there was a little bit more there, but overall I'm really liking it. I do think the animation improved in season 2 over season 1, so that's been good. But I like the fact that they're handling themes in a intelligent way, but still kind of something that kids can follow.
Mm-hmm. And Bina, how about you?
I'm going to give it 3.5. I'm going to knock off half a point each for one, the character accent for Rhaegar, which I find really brings me out of the series. And she's such a key character, and I really like her character, but it's just not a Scottish accent by any... it's very distracting, I think, for me and maybe other British viewers. I'd love to know. The second half point I take off just because, it is basically for kids, even though it's really well done. And there are certain scenes or bits of exposition where you're like, okay, yeah, like I am an adult and this is a little bit boring now. And then the final half point I knock, as in season 1, just because I think it's actually really strong fantasy, and I love the world they're creating, and the revelation of the new mirror, big bad elf. And I just find that some of the humor and dialogue, which is so very contemporary, again, I find that it brings me out. Whereas if you read George R. R. Martin or Lord of the Rings or whatever, it stays very in-world, and this is very clearly sort of set in contemporary speech patterns and whatnot. So accent, contemporary, yeah, that brings me out a little bit.
Cool. And Zach, how about you?
I'm pretty much the same with everyone else. I think I would give the first season 3.5 jelly tarts, and I'd actually go up a little bit for season 2. I actually think I enjoyed it a little bit more, so I'd give that 4. I felt like season 2 was a little bit better paced. Felt like they got to spend a little bit more time with the characters in these kind of 3 episode arc chunks, which is the way I watched it, 3 episodes at a time, which I think really added to the experience. But yeah, in general, just I really like the characters, though I do also find Rayla's accent really distracting, even though I have no context for what a correct accent is. I just find it distracting. But I like all the characters. I like the world. I don't love the animation style. I that does kind of bug me. I do like the character designs and the art, but the way that the characters actually move and the kind of low frame rate they use does not really appeal to me. But otherwise, really enjoyed it. I thought season 2 was a step up for me in terms of the pacing, in terms of I thought the actual comedy writing and all that kind of stuff was much improved for me in season 2. But those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'd probably give it like a 4.5. Probably the first season a 4, and then season 2 like maybe a 4.75 also. I really liked season 2 over season 1, just in terms of like it felt like it wasn't a journey story anymore. Like it still is taking place within the context of a journey story, but I felt like the politics and all like the drama was really amped up, and they're really not afraid to be like, okay, we're going to be philosophical now and like talk about big ideas. And I just really appreciated that. Plus, Claudia really had her day in the sun, I think, in season 2, and I love Claudia so much. Yeah, but I think that's a pretty good overall. I think we can safely say that we enjoyed it. Anyone wanna? We're gonna focus mostly on season 2, because that's what came out most recently. But does anyone want to point anything out about season 1? High points, low points?
I just want to point out that the highlight of my day is one of the showrunners liking my tweet about something that happened in season 1 that reminded me of Twin Peaks. And when I told my other half about this, he thought it was just tinfoilery. But the fact that he likes me maybe thinks that it validates it, even though it probably doesn't. He was probably just tickled by the idea that I had thought it. I don't know. I'm taking it as a validation that it's a reference to Twin Peaks. So I'm going with that.
I mean, that's valid.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the elf Runan being trapped in a coin by.
Reading spoilers, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the face of Runan being stuck in the coin and the expression you see when he's trapped in the coin really reminded me of the fate of Josie Packard in Twin Peaks. Just felt very, very, very close. And I just thought this was a show that was probably meta enough that was a direct reference, just as we got all the clumsy sort of one does not simply walk into Mordor references.
So I loved that. That was like right up my alley. Anyone else have any thoughts about season 2?
Well, just to follow up on the one does not simply walk into, like, I love all their kind of meta fantasy moments. I think in the first season there was there was a winter's coming kind of
eventually
kind of nod that we had, right? So
yeah.
I think it's very cool that they're self-conscious in a very playful way of being a part of this larger kind of fantasy construct, and that those are the who will be watching it, you know what I mean? Like that they would appreciate this kind of, which, I mean, I don't know, sort of, I guess, contrary to what you were saying, Bina, about it not being completely insular, completely in-world, the way that Song of Ice and Fire is. Like, I think that's part of what makes it charming on a kind of meta fantasy level, where it is kind of playing with that very self-consciously. I think if it were just lazy writing, or they couldn't be bothered to create the kind of in-world continuity that something more quote-unquote sophisticated would, I think that it's so obviously self-conscious that it's part of its charm, I think, more so than, at least for me.
It is kind of like it is very modern in that way. I wonder, Bina, you've never watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, have you?
No, and all I would say about it is some of the humor, like the sort of, hey, you don't get sarcasm, do you, and all that kind of like modern banter, I think means that this will age poorly relative to some of the more classic bits of fantasy. But yeah, no, I haven't. How does this compare to that? Should I watch it?
So yes, you should definitely, absolutely watch Avatar: The Last Airbender. Amazing show. But the showrunner, one of the showrunners, Aaron Haas, comes from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and there's a lot that's kind of both structurally, thematically, and also in that kind of like contemporary humor. That like I almost view it as like a relaxed kind of humor, that they're not like they're not afraid to make the characters like just shimmy around or do something that is like out of beat almost. And it echoes that a lot, that tone from Avatar. And so I think for me, it's sort of like it was already sort of part of that arc of like continuing fantasy stories. So I wonder if like that might be the difference. I don't know, Zach, did you feel that at all?
I think so. I think that there's a lot. It's something that I see a lot in also Japanese animation as well. It's like there is this just self-referential, this self-consciousness and self-awareness that I think in this kind of show works just fine. I do take Bina's point. It may not age well, some of the comedy that is very contemporary that won't have the same kind of context for people watching, but I almost don't feel like that matters for a show like this. I don't think this show wants to be that kind of classic. I think it wants to be of its time in a way.
Yeah. Interesting. So moving on to season 2, I guess first, any like general thoughts? Like I said, I was a big fan. Anyone else want to chime in before we dive into characters and stuff?
No, if we're just going to be jumping into characters.
I need to echo that with you, Michal. I probably did like season 2 better than season 1. I totally agree with Sara that season 1 had a more closed arc. But with season 2, I really enjoyed the extended flashback and the getting more richness on the history of the world. So that probably tips me over the edge. Plus, baby dragon, people. Cute baby dragon.
I know.
Anyone?
It's so cute. I can't deal with it.
I don't know. We already had Bait in season 1. Shouldn't that have been enough?
Bait's funny. Bait's not cute.
I'm team Bait. I think if we're team Bait versus team Zim, I think
I support Bait. He has a weird pug cat kind of feel to him. I love him.
I actually noted down that one of the most heartbreaking scenes of the season for me was probably Bait feeling so scorned and feeling replaced on the boat. That was actually genuinely kind of heartbreaking. Yeah. So I do like Bait.
Soren's can't move his body anymore. Oh, I'm sad for him, but Bait's still kind of experiencing some loss himself.
Yeah.
It's basically the same thing.
Totally. Yeah. One for one exchange.
Right.
So let's go into characters. Of course, we have our main character, Callum, who is the stepson of the prince, the son of the queen, stepson of the king, son of the queen who was married to the king and has since died. And he is kind of, doesn't really know where he's going in life. He's kind of a nerd. He's kind of not athletic. And he discovers this sort of skill for magic that takes a very interesting turn in the second season because he's denied that thing that he thought he was supposed to be good at. I don't know. Any particular thoughts on Callum as kind of our central? I think he's more central than main, but yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
I did really like the twist with the him losing the stone and then sort of having to go through this whole thing where like, oh well, humans don't really do magic, but why? I thought that was a nice way to change it up.
It almost feels like he is the main character because whether or not he can do magic because he has secret magical parentage or because humans can do magic seems like such a central question at the end of season 2.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't know. I think Callum interests me personally a little. Like, I like him. He's a good character, but he interests me a little bit less because he feels like he's on a more typical fantasy like journey. Like kind of like, oh, boy learns power, boy has power, and it is more complicated than that. But and I really like the way Jack DeSena plays him, and I like, the twists that he goes through with, learning with, dabbling in dark magic and kind of struggling with all of his abilities. And I did actually think that it was really kind of profound to be like, oh, okay, so I found my thing. I know what my thing is. I know how to be me, and then to have that completely taken away from you. Like, that's very an interesting position. But I'm personally like less interested in that than I am in like Ezrin or Claudia.
Well, I think you said to have it taken away from him, but I think one of the things that made his character profound in a way that, and I agree, first of all, that he is on a very, very sort of traditional, like finding yourself, fantasy journey as puberty kind of arc. But I think the fact that he's the one who smashed the stone in order to save Zim suggests that he is a little bit above your sort of typical, you know what I mean? So it wasn't just like he realized that he couldn't do magic, or like it was taken away from him in a very kind of passive sense. Like he was allowed to make the conscious decision to give that up in pursuit of a greater good, which I thought sort of leveled it up a little bit from a lot of times, when you see the same arc.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I also really like the symmetry between him having that dialogue with his dead father, where he realizes he doesn't have to be a prisoner for the past or the future, and also that lovely young queen realizing that just because historically her family made decisions, she doesn't have to make the same ones. And even Soren as a sort of comedy leitmotif, that when he's injured and thinks he can't walk again, that he's like, I'm free of my father's expectations now. There's something very nice about this younger generation being able to throw off the shackles and reject fate or predestination by repeating history's mistakes. I really like that sort of theme in the whole season.
Soren is Jaime Lannister, right? Like, I know we're going to talk about him, but can we just like...
He creates his own problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. But I think that's also, it's interesting. I don't think I thought of this before, but it is sort of like a minor comment. Like, obviously the major theme is on like strength and versus violence and peace and whatever. But it's also like something of a comment on masculinity, because I don't think that any of the, like, Soren is kind of the only like masculine, like stereotypical dude in the show, really. Ezrin is obviously an artist. He's not a jock. And I mean, Callum, and Ezrin is it's interesting because Ezrin's voice actor is actually a girl. But it's very interesting to me how like sensitive and like gentle he is. And, also King Harrow is not your typical, like, rule with an iron fist.
Corvus, everyone. Corvus, athletic.
That's
loyal,
true. Extremely good looking.
Well, Corvus also,
good looking.
In the little that we see of him, he demonstrates some vulnerability in the way that he kind of gets very nervous and freaks out when Ezrin goes missing. I think he's not some kind of cool, calm, collected character.
Commander Gren.
Oh,
I love
Gren.
Commander Gren, our maiden in the tower.
Amaya's gonna save you. Don't worry, baby. It's okay.
Has a remarkably good attitude about being chained up against the wall.
Oh my god. I think
he just rolls with it.
I think Corvus's line to Ezrin was probably the best one in the season for me, in season 2, where he's like, with all due respect, you're a weird king.
That was really good.
Or if I may be so bold, you're a weird king.
And just the I know,
yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to Rayla, who is our elven wannabe assassin. Still hasn't gotten there yet. It's interesting because she's the one who kind of puts all the pieces together and realizes that this peace mission can be as powerful as like we come to realize that it is, of the act of 2 human princes returning the stolen the egg that their parents stole and presumed were thought to have killed. But yeah, Rayla is sort of caught in the middle because she doesn't have like the exact like interpersonal drama of, oh my gosh, I left my parent behind. I don't know what's going on. She's kind of like very much mission driven, and then is also, I don't know, she kind of like gets like the role of prejudice, I think, is a really important thing in Rayla's arc, because we see kind of the ways those like barriers break down of, we're all on the same side, we're gonna go and do this mission, and it's definitely not that simple by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know if that made sense. Does anyone have thoughts on Rayla?
I think her arc is related in much more subtle but no less apparent, or no less important ways to the generational thing that we've just identified, like the idea of sort of whether you learn from the past generation, whether you're burdened by their expectations. But we learn in the first season that her parents were dragon guards, and that they were supposed to prevent the death of the Dragon King and the subsequent theft of the egg, but that they abandoned their post, right? And so that's a foundation that they've built in, that I feel like once they get back to Zadia and start interacting with the dragons more, that may be on par with kind of what we're seeing of Claudia and Soren, or of Callum, where she can either learn from the past and be free of it, or she's going to be caught up in what her parents did or didn't do.
And you can clearly see that history in what I think are the two main aspects of her growth as a character, which are learning to trust people, of course, and learning to be trusted by other people, but also trying to kind of actualize what her identity is going to be. She has that conversation with Vilas, the blind pirate, where she's basically saying, I don't want to be an assassin, I want to learn to be something else. And part of that may be that she sees that her parents couldn't fulfill the role that they took up, and she needs to understand what her new role is going to be in this context she finds herself in. And I think that's all very interesting. I don't think we've really gotten it explored to the degree I would like with Rayla yet, but you would assume now that we're in Zadia in season 3 that she will take more of a focus going forward, and at least seeing more of her backstory and seeing more of what made her who she is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think in season 2, Rayla didn't have a ton to do, really. She kind of like she's like worried at the beginning about leaving and getting into Zadia, and then she's stressed out on the boat and nauseous on the boat, and she kind of like has that mini revelation about her fate. And then it's kind of like saving the dragon-ish. I don't know. But I'm interested to see if, like, in terms of the generational thing, like, we find out about Rayla's parents when she's still kind of very much in the Zadia mode, and like this is right, and like you don't leave your post and you don't XYZ. And I kind of wonder if there is like more to that story, and her parents like sacrifice themselves, or like something in that, like, just standing and fighting to the end is not necessarily the right choice all the time. That was a thought that occurred to me.
Well, I think we already discussed the accent, right, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if they were going for a Scottish accent, it just seemed kind of off to me. But I did notice like some legitimate rage from people on the internet and I'm assuming it's more like people in the UK that were like, "What the hell?" Which I could see that, but I feel like because she's just supposed to be an elf with some weird elf accent. It's like, I mean, and I'm not really being all that concerned with it, but
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's not the greatest accent.
For it. I mean, I think it's just, I appreciate the attempt, because I think it's another aspect of diversity. I love that there are people of color in this show and LGBTQ representation, and I love that you have someone using sign language. That's the first time I've ever seen that in a kids animation. And I love that regionally diverse accents is it's a very big thing in the UK, that everyone, when I was growing up, had accents like me, basically Southern received pronunciation, and having regionally diverse accents is a big thing here. So I love that they intended that. I just think that the execution was a bit poor. And I know she's an elf, so it doesn't have to be Scottish. But the fact that it's kind of like 80% there and 20% off. And
was it like nails on a chalkboard to you, Bina?
It really was. I mean, it means I didn't comment on her character.
That's what I've heard from others.
I feel that I can't engage with her as a character. It's a real block, and that's on me, right? Because rather than the show, I love that they attempted it. I just think, honestly, they should recast it or drop the fact that it's Scottish for season 3.
No, correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't the voice actress actually Scottish?
No.
No, we were
not.
just looking that up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm being
She's got, like,
misinformed
YouTube
by the
videos
internet,
and stuff.
apparently.
She's just
What?
American.
Yeah,
so.
it's crazy.
Yeah,
It says on the Dragon Prince Wikipedia thing that she is a Scottish actress, so they must not have that right.
I mean, she has red hair.
Okay, yeah,
she has
how you
very
can tell.
Merida hair, but I don't think she's actually Scottish.
Scottish or Irish couldn't be. It was gonna be one of the two, right? I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do think it was an odd choice to cast an American to do a Scottish accent. Like, I think, to me, it was a little weird that everybody had, like, all the characters with quote-unquote British accents have different accents, but, like, it doesn't bother me. I agree that and Rayla's accent, I think I just kind of went with it, but I agree it's a weird choice, and it's something that I've seen that on the animation. I think were two of the big, like, flags that people had in this season.
Can we just give a big thumbs up to her human accent, though, because I really enjoy that very, very much. She's like, I love human.
I am a big fan of human Rayla.
Human fellas.
Yeah, human Rayla is great.
Let's discuss our sub-century lifespan and complain about things.
Let's discuss.
And then there's such an LA joke, right?
Jeez, y'all. I mean, I think accent and all that aside, like she portrayal aside, she's still just an adorable character. She's a lot of fun. Like the point where she's like running, like doing like a perimeter check, and like there's the giant spider, and she's like, oh, you again, like, I don't know. It's just there's a lot of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to Ezrin and Zim, who I think really are kind of a pair, since they're, like, psychically bonded and both ridiculously adorable. I was so happy.
You're a handful, Ezrin. You're a handful, but he doesn't even have hands. Oh, heartbreaking.
I love him so much. I really do. He's so, like, he's so innocent and sweet in, like, a smart way somehow. Like, there's just, like, a wisdom there that is so appealing to me. And I'm, like, really interested to see this little kid thrown into the political quagmire that's going to be whatever's going on in the next season. Like, I think that'll be really interesting.
Oh my god, he and Tiny Leon and Mormont are going to be amazing together.
Yeah. He and Anya just team up.
Yeah.
Well, don't get me started on Anya. She's amazing.
She's amazing.
Yeah. And I was so happy when Zim was born, because I was like, that was the moment in season 1 when Zim was born. I was like, okay, there's a baby dragon. I'm like watching every single episode of the show, no matter what happens. Like, that's it. I am sold. I have a thing for baby dragons, and Zim is so cute, and I love how they make him like a combo cat dog. Like, he purrs, and then he also like moves like a dog. I love him so much.
He's very
baby dragons are the only good dragons.
He's very toothless in that way. I feel like they've borrowed a lot from Toothless.
Yeah, I only saw the first one.
Cat dog.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, yeah, like it applies regardless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then trying to get him to fly with that totally safe zip line.
Yeah.
Soren took no joy in that.
I actually
throws him into the
love.
bush. And he's like, "Oh my god, you killed the dragon prince!" He's like, "Oh god."
Actually, Zim escapes death, quote unquote death, like multiple times this season.
Yeah.
He
And
takes
it's
a
always
direct
kind of
hit
like
from a lightning bolt, so I'm pretty sure he's
Lightning
nigh
dragon.
on indestructible.
He's a lightning dragon, yeah.
His father's name is Thunder, so I would hope that he can
Yeah.
pick a lightning bolt.
Lame name.
Lightning, very sorry.
Yeah, I really did like actually how, it sort of starts off and it feels like Zim learning to fly is going to be like an ongoing plot point, and then they really kind of drop it, and it only comes back at the very end when it becomes like critically important that this baby dragon learn how to fly. So I kind of liked that, like, laying the groundwork without.
It's the most complicated border crossing ever.
Yeah. I don't know about that, to be honest. But yeah, that was a beautiful scene.
One does simply walk in.
It's very Indiana Jones, that final border crossing.
Mm-hmm. I just love, like, I wrote an article about this, but I'm just gonna, like, gush for a second about the parallel there, because like, it's Ezrin, keep messing up the names. It's Callum and Rayla who are, like, trying to enter Zadia, and they're allowed to do that because of Zim, like, hiding the sun, which is a complete parallel to, like, when Callum's mother, like, was killed leaving Zadia by Zim's father, when he blocked the sun, and I like it a lot.
And I'd recommend checking out that article. I've read that, and it does kind of show that they do have this greater thematic connection between, like, you would maybe look at that scene with Zim covering the sun and not think much of it, but there's a lot more going on there that Michal uncovers.
That I said in a much smarter way than I did just now. So definitely read it. Okay, so Claudia and Soren, my two faves.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, all right. That's fine.
Well, I love Claudia because she's very much like the type of fantasy character that I've wanted for a long time. She's like kind of a cross between, like, I mean, she's not really like Sansa, but she is like Sansa in that kind of, like, she clearly cares about her appearance. She's not like a tomboy, she's a reader. And at the same time, she's just like a complete dork. And at the same time, she's also delving into evil arcane magics. And that combination is just so delicious to me. I'm a very big fan.
Yeah, I find Claudia very interesting. I like characters that are contradictions in ways. I find the way that she is, so caring in her own way, obviously, with her brother and with Callum, but also is willing to do these dark evil deeds with magic, and is willing to capture them and serve her father's will, and these kind of different pulling forces. I find that so interesting, and I find the way that they realize her in that way, where she, from a moment can switch from hanging out with Ezrin and having a good time, and then, like, pulling the heart out of these deer or whatever she does to use their magic. I love that those things can exist in one person, and that's not something you normally get to see in a kid show, is a character that has that kind of duality to them.
Mm-hmm.
I see her and Soren set up, especially in this season, as kind of the split of Viren's personality. And I mean, maybe this is a conversation more to have, because, like, I've spent a lot of time since we watched season 2 trying to explain to my 5-year-old, like, exactly what the hell is wrong with Viren, and we can get into that in just a minute. But, like, I feel like Soren has his impulsivity as far as, like, let's just solve it now, and he doesn't really think through the consequences, whereas Claudia has what is poised to become a very problematic reliance on dark magic, similar to what we've seen from him. And I had hoped, I think, or maybe thought, that when she tries to do the healing spell immediately after they discover that Soren can't move, and it failed, and she had that moment of panic, and she's like, I don't have anything else, and it should have worked, and I don't know why it didn't. I had hoped for her that would be almost an awakening or kind of redirection, where, like, maybe there are other alternative, but instead she just like leveled up on the very, very dark magic, right? Where she's like, yeah, I need some milk fruit. Oh yeah, dear, and then she was like, okay, I'm gonna collect this fruit. And as you said, it was like harvesting the life force of, like, this adorable deer.
Look, she makes dark magic pancakes. I mean,
right.
Pancakes.
But I think you're going to get your learning
problem.
experience in season 3, aren't you? So she has to go this dark. Like, she has to make this real sacrifice, symmetric sacrifice, to save her brother. Mm-hmm. And now we're going to see the consequences in season 3. That's what I hope for. I hope for both of them, actually. I don't find them particularly exciting characters right now, but I think they could be the ones who are most interesting next season as, one hopes that Soren has had some kind of learning experience from being incapacitated. Starts to really see what's going on with his father and his sister. And maybe that might become more interesting.
This is maybe more kind of fraught than we want to get into, but as far as, I've been so impressed, and we touched on this already, as far as like the representational characterizations in here, so like the LGBTQ and the ASL, and but I felt like the way that they handled his very brief quadriplegia was a swing and a miss on that front. Like, the takeaway for me was that she had to do this incredibly powerful act of dark magic essentially because he was like too stupid to be paralyzed, which is very problematic for me.
So I was actually having this conversation with someone about this idea in other contexts, and we've mentioned Jamie, but this idea of kind of using paralysis or some kind of disability as a vehicle for character growth being in a way kind of ableist. And in this context, just it being so cavalierly used, like you say, Sarah, where he is briefly paralyzed and he seems completely, I don't know, immune to what the consequences of that are. And maybe there's something to that. Maybe there's something to that about his character, but I don't know. I found it very off-putting as well, especially how it quote unquote is fixed so immediately. I thought it was a little off.
I felt like he had that moment, and again we talked about this, but just where he's like, okay, well maybe I'm free from the expectations that have come with my physical excellence, right? But then Claudia literally has that line, like, he can't be like this, he can't even count syllables. And it's like, I don't really think that's the reason that, we should be invested in his recovery. I don't know. It struck an unexpected sour note with me, especially given the generosity and the sensitivity with which they've encountered other kinds of the other groups and other.
It's a bit of a blind spot for them. It is interesting. That does seem to be the last one of these old kind of genre cliches, like the Hollywood film with someone overcoming disability that is being questioned. I'm kind of involved a little bit with the British Film Institute, who are the ex-Film Council, so they fund a lot of film production, and they've just come out with a policy that they will no longer fund films where autism is used as something to delineate character. So they're kind of the shorthand for saying, oh, he's super smart but a little bit quirky, so House or The Good Doctor or whatever. But it has to be something that's more organic. It can't just be used as a shorthand. And I wonder if they would get to the point where with this they would say, actually, this is also not acceptable. It feels like we're very much at the cutting edge of attitudes or this or sensitivity towards this changing, and it hadn't struck me at all watching this. But now that you say it, it kind of feels obvious. So I feel stupid for not having noticed it. But yeah,
so
it's
I'll say
fascinating
why
how it changes.
It worked for me, and I don't think anything that you said is invalid. I think it's a total that's something to be considered for sure. Anytime you're dealing with disability or paralysis or anything like that. To me, it more worked because it wasn't really like the healing of Soren was about Claudia. It wasn't really about Soren. I don't think he changed when he became paralyzed. I think it was more
No, I don't think so either.
That was who he was underneath, and that was what allowed him to be relieved of that burden. I found it a really powerful line that I can't do anything terrible because I can't do anything, whereas his obligations previously were more powerful than that feeling. And and the fact that he was healing, he can't count syllables, but it's his first haiku, we don't, he does a successful one later, so it's possible that to me it was very much Claudia being unable to accept that he had changed in that way. And
isn't it a profound change for him to know that the fact that he couldn't do anything means he can't do his father's will, but now that he can return to doing anything, he retains that mental note and point of conscience in his ear that, hey, remember that thing you discovered, that you do have free will and you don't just have to go along? shouldn't that be a point of change?
Oh, it's interesting. So I guess
I think it's season 3 we'll discover whether it is. But I would, if he doesn't fundamentally get some more agency relative to his father in season 3, I'll be very disappointed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe that's fair. I was seeing it as undercutting the quote unquote progress that he was made, but yeah, potentially. I mean, it would almost be more profound a change if, in fact, he retains that forward trajectory in spite of being physically recovered, right? Like that. Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting.
And I mean, that's the challenge, right? Like, something I really do appreciate about the show is that, like, it doesn't put its characters in, like, the position to make a ton of easy decisions, you know? Like Ezran turning around and, like, accepting that he has to be king is not an easy decision. You know, Soren kind of, like, trying to thread that line of, like, oh, I have to kill Ezran, but I don't want to, but have to. So I'm going to, like, do it, but it's an accident. And then, you know, the whole, like, to me, his whole process is very much, like, coming to realize that he can be independent of his father, just as kind of Claudia is also learning that, but also by the same token, driving herself further into, you know, her father's realm of existence, really. And I don't think there would be anyone who she could get advice from in terms of, like, the dark magic arena except for him. And I mean, I guess Aravos, maybe that wouldn't go well.
In fact, the case of Ezran, it takes Aragorn 3 books to face up to his responsibilities to be king.
Yeah, he should have been an 8-year-old boy.
Sort of like a 100-year-old guy.
Right. Half elf. It's okay. Everything he does is fine because he's a half elf. It's okay.
I do want to echo that sentiment, Michal. I do think it is so good, and again, it's coming back to that point about Claudia, where she has these contradictions to her and these different pulling forces. I do like that the characters are faced with these difficult choices, and I do think that's I hope at least that's something that doesn't go away. That when Soren and Claudia return to their father, there is still a tension there. They're not resolved against him in that way, because there are these different influences in their life that still matter. It's not something that can easily be fixed like that. If Soren was steadfastly on the free will path because of this brief experience being paralyzed, that to me would actually be the least impressive way to handle that. If, like, he's paralyzed for 2 minutes and that fundamentally changes his character, I would think that would be actually the least effective way to use that as a character device.
Well, and I love the way that they have forced a confrontation, or at least set up a forced confrontation with their relationship with Viren, because he is now in very dire circumstances, right? So they're going to return theoretically thinking that he's the de facto, guardian, or the de facto regent, and then he's actually in prison for treason. Ezran is also back, probably trying to decide what to do with him. And, you know, they're going to be caught in a kind of very different kind of loyalty double bind, right? Like, are they going to help him? Are they going to rescue him? Are they continue acting on his orders, even though he's effectively a traitor at this point? Like, you know, I think that their loyalties are going to be equally tested, but they've shifted the ground on which that test is going to take place in a very radical way, which I think is very promising for season 3.
Putting Ezran back into that setting is such a cool move to me. It's something that was completely unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
You figure that Ezran would just continue on the journey into Zadia. That's the kind of classic way that you would think it would go. But putting him back in the political mire and him being who he is, and obviously there are people, at the very least Viren, that are gunning to kill him off.
Mm-hmm.
That's such an interesting... I love that move, and I'm really excited to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, I agree. For sure.
Yeah, I assumed we'd see, Viren force himself into power, till the end of the series, confrontation, yada yada yada. So that is a nice change.
Yeah. One more thing about Soren before we talk about Viren. I think part of also what made it work for me is that, like, it's so connected to Soren's own actions. Everything that happens to him, like he's the one who decides, like, oh, we can't, like, yeah, this dragon is acting threatening, but it's also clearly not intending to attack us. He's the one who can't let that go, where the rest of the town is like, dude, like, chill. And he's the one who, starts that confrontation, who winds up in the direct conflict with the dragon, which is how he becomes paralyzed. So I think, and he clearly has a lot of guilt for, the havoc that was wreaked on the town. So I think that to me was also a very important element of it, that it wasn't just like this like random happenstance and like, oh, now I have a new perspective. It was kind of the ability to have that perspective based on more than just like the physical like consequences.
I completely agree. Even if he hadn't become disabled, the guilt, all of the sort of consequences and fallout of the decision he took should have an altering effect on him. And we can judge him either way if he doesn't. One last thought on Claudia is just it reminds, stupid parallel again, just like my Twin Peaks one. It really reminded me a bit of Anakin Skywalker trying to save Padme. That she goes to use the dark magic out of love, right? And I think therefore the consequences and emotional fallout from it's going to be even worse, heavier, more interesting, complicated.
Yeah, and I just like that so much because she's not like, it's not like she doesn't know, like she's just established that Ezrin can speak to animals, so she's not like, so she does use him to help her find these deer, but she's also not like, I'm going to make him watch while I suck the life force out of his new animal friends, It's very, like, I feel like I agree with Zach in that it's very balanced. Like, she kind of keeps tilting one way or the other. Like, I liked very much that they established that her feelings, romantic or friendly or whatever, for Callum are genuine. Like, she's not, like, she wasn't putting that on. That was a real experience for her. So she's complicated. Like her father, Lord Viren.
Sorry, not to stuff. I know, I ruined it.
Destroyed.
I did really like that line that she had. That she's like, I'm sorry that sometimes some of the things I have to do are frightening, but I have to do, and I think I felt like almost an apology as much to herself as it was to Ezrin. But yeah, sorry, go ahead. Like her father, Lord Viren, who also does frightening things.
Another great segue.
But no one thinks they're a bad person, right? In their own head, they're doing what they're doing because they think they're doing it for the safety of the realm. And even in Viren's eyes, right? I mean, does he think of himself as a bad guy? No. He thinks of himself as the one with the courage and the skill to take the tough decisions. And that's what makes it fascinating. I mean, when he looks in the mirror, he's very conscious that, do I trust you? This is tricksy. This is weird. But yeah, I think they're more similar.
Yeah, so Viren is the Grand Mage. What, I don't know exactly what his title is.
High Mage, I think.
High Mage. So he is the guy who is kind of like the main purveyor of magic through primal stones and also through dark magic. Very close to King Harrow. Probably, at least if my theory and many people's theories is correct, he saved his life by transferring Harrow's spirit into the bird back in episode 3 of the series.
Right.
Yeah. But he's also like, okay, so kill the princess. He's a complicated fellow.
I really hope that we get the backstory on precisely how he and Harrow became so close, because they seem so disparate in terms of character by the time we see them that even at the moment or at the point where he included Viren in his royal portrait, like they're so far apart on so many issues, and I feel like Harrow is very much stuck in the middle between Viren on one side and Sarai on the other, and it's that whole dynamic is so fascinating to me because it doesn't seem, I don't know if they're like Ned and Robert and they, grew up together and then, I don't know, but it was interesting to me that he became so influential, but yet was so different.
Yeah, I'm just kind of assuming they must have grown up together or had some sort of, past connection, and then it's really hard for a king to trust anybody. So.
Yeah, that was my impression just based on the fact that, I think when he's introducing the flashback, he's like, my best friend, King Harrow, which to me suggested that this went, past like political, like they didn't meet as political allies or anything like that. But I mean, it's also possible that something happened with some kind of battle thing, because we still don't know how Viren got his like limp. So yeah, I kind of wonder if that might be part of it. But Viren's like in season 2, Viren's central conflict is he's become obsessed with this mirror that was taken from the lair of the Dragon King and Queen. And he knows there's something intensely, amazingly magical inside the mirror. So he goes to extreme lengths to uncover it, and finally finds out that it's a prison, I guess, of sorts, for a Star Touch elf called Aravos, who is so evil that his name can't exist in books anymore, and who thinks it's like really fun to communicate through a little beetle in your ear, or caterpillar, or whatever.
People would lie. Yeah. Would lie.
No, I thought he was erasing his own name so that Viren wouldn't know who he was. Like, because you see him closing a book as Viren comes back to complain. So I thought, I mean, I didn't think it was that it was like spontaneously. I thought it was that he was like, you know, you don't really need to know who I am. Don't worry about it. And so he was anticipating the books that Viren was going to find on him and like systematically erasing them.
Ah, that didn't occur to me, but I think that's a very strong possibility.
Yeah, as a D&D player, just watching the two interact, I'm like, well, this is definitely just like prime warlock patron interactions right here. Just the way, first off, I just loved the whole like ritual that had to be undergone just to contact each other. And the fact that he can't speak through the mirror, so he has this little caterpillar does it for him. And I was just really interested. Everything magic in the second season, I've been like, well, that's super cool way of doing that.
It reminded me of a Bluetooth headset, like the way it kind of draped over his ear, like
it's like a bug tooth.
Yeah, you think you look like an idiot with a Bluetooth, you got an earworm.
And then it goes inside his ear at the end.
That was so unacceptable. Yeah.
But the interesting thing is
he's
that
like, yeah, it's hide in my ear. Great.
But like Viren resists the urge to I guess throw all in with Aravos initially, because he thinks he can handle it on his own. He decides to go to he sets up this meeting of the Pentarchy, with the leaders, the actual real leaders of the other 5 kingdoms. And that's where not only do we get a lot of flashbacks, and we also meet the amazing Queen Anya, but I just want to focus on one thing at the very end, because at the end of that kind of arc, we see Viren kind of make an appeal to Anya, and he's like, obviously, like, this is what we need to do. Like, we're in so much danger. Your family would do this. And she agrees, and then she refuses to do it. And I felt very torn, because on the one hand, I was like, yeah, Anya, stand up to him. Do what you think is right. You know, don't go with the past, which is because we're
right.
that same theme. But at the same time, I almost felt like Viren was one of those people who's like screaming about climate change, and everybody's like, my people would suffer too much if we did this, if we got involved.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
because to them, they should be agreeing with him, like with what they know, and her refusal makes it seem like she almost is on to his game, which she couldn't be.
Right, but I don't think he's making, like, I think he's genuine in that meeting. Like, I think he has ulterior motives, but I also think
right, but he doesn't have the authority there.
Right, yeah, but I to me that was very like intense and a really strong way of being like, you know, of leading into this the next act of his story, which is obviously this extreme slope into not great stuff.
But has that now been, I mean, because that is such also very much a kind of trope, as far as, you know, the guy who thinks he's doing the right thing and he has nearly unlimited power. And I mean, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is he could easily become a Jafar, right? But like, has their arrest of him for treason and subsequent imprisonment forestalled that? Has that completely redirected what we think of as a traditional arc also? And if so, in what direction Is that, I mean, because I find it very difficult to believe that he's just going to bust out of prison and go back to, using. But
Right.
he's also sown the seeds by sending those shadow warriors to each of the kingdoms. So it could be that his arc has been sort of radically forestalled, but the damage that he's done is what's going to be the primary focus going forward. Like, he's almost moot at this point.
I don't know if you guys had this impression, but to me, I felt like for most of season 1 and a bit here in season 2, it was like they were trying to get us to believe that at any moment he could just sort of snap out of it and come back to reality and go, no, wait a second, what I'm doing is wrong. But then he does these horrific things, so I don't know.
So to me, it felt like that was Arvos taking, like, almost hijacking Viren's arc in a way, like, because I didn't feel like Arvos stops fighting very specifically when like the more soldiers that come in, like the last time we see Viren, and he like basically tells him to give up, and he's like, no, I'll stay with you. So to me, that was very much Arvos is like, okay, this is my plan. This is what I'm doing now. I've sent these assassins / terror shadows to the other kingdoms, and he has a plan that's at work. So to me, it's almost like interesting to see where Viren, because Viren's like the strongest personality in the show almost, and to have that taken or hijacked by Aravos, I think will be a really interesting battle, and like whether he perceives that as bad or whether he convinces himself that he still has to go along with it. Or, I mean, now that Aravos has an actor, he has a physical force in the world. I think that puts Viren in a really interesting position. In addition to, like, I think Aravos is totally 100% fine with Viren being in prison for now, and he's like, this is part of the plan.
I just felt very sorry for Viren when I saw him being manipulated by Aravos in the mirror, even though I know Viren doesn't mean well.
He does mean well, though, right?
He does, yeah.
He does mean well.
He does badly, and he means well.
It just made me sad, and I just thought, and it's just the parallels with Claudia. Like, he's messing with the stuff. He always seems to do it for the right reasons, but he's almost addicted to it. He's like, and it's a little bit like Callum, right?
Oh, definitely.
Magic and has it taken away from him. And how do these humans cope with the magic they have access to? So I have a lot of sympathy with him. I'm really fascinated by Viren. I'd argue he's my favorite character, and that the Viren-Aravos interaction is my favorite interaction.
I think one of the most important things about the hijacking of his arc is going to be how it affects Claudia and Soren. Like, I really do think in much that I keep kind of tying it back to Song of Ice and Fire, but I think that in much the same way that the first generation is there, or the parental generation is there almost to complicate things for the people who are our primary focus, I think that his time is coming to an end, and whether that's because he's been forestalled by the arrest for treason, or whether it's because, as you say, he's been hijacked by Aravos, I think that Viren as Viren is of the past, and that going forward, what's going to matter is the ramifications of the things that he set in motion a long time ago.
They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They do not mean to, but they do. Yeah.
Well, that was like what, Claudia's conversation with Ezrin really brought out. I thought that I was crying a little bit when that happened.
That was good.
Yeah.
I thought there were two good representations of obviously that part of what it's like to have parents who are separated, but also the part with Harrow describing what it's like to be a stepfather and trying to take on that role with Callum. I thought that was a really nice representation also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so lovely, so touching. And the whole arc, the whole idea that you have a kids show with quite young kids watching, and have season 2 basically be about coping with grief and losing a parent, and how you communicate that knowledge and how it affects all the relationships around you, whether in terms of Harrow with the father of Callum. So moving and brave. I loved it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I like so much about this show and that I'm responding to so strongly, particularly as I'm watching it through with a 5-year-old, is the extent to which they have managed so carefully to toe the line between still being accessible to children, but also being very deeply respectful of any audience that's watching. And I think representationally, that's true. I think as far as the themes that they're addressing, the way that they're addressing them, in last season and in this one, we got to episodes where I was like, oh my God, I really should have watched this ahead of time. Like, what the hell am I doing watching this? And they get so close to being too much and to making it too intense and too far. And then they find that perfect balance where, she's watching it and she's enraptured and she's, nervous, and I'm thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to damage my baby by sharing her, this with her. But there's enough to talk about and enough to appreciate and enough to really feel without taking it too far. And I think that's absolutely artful the way that it's done in the show. Like when we were watching the escape from Zadia, and the Thunder is pursuing Sarai, and you know what's coming, right? Because she's not alive anymore, and she's kind of like cringing on the couch, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't preview this. But it was so well done, and it was so deeply felt and deeply respectful of what children can handle and what children are expected to handle in these situations of grief and loss that, sort of in the real world are almost taken for granted, I think, from the kids' perspective in a lot of ways. And this has been a really beautiful engagement with, I think, the excellences that children are capable of, both as far as just sort of feeling creatures, but then also as audience members as well. And I've been really grateful for that.
Yeah, and that thing, that motif that keeps repeating through the season of like an older person telling a younger person that like, and then it culminates in Ezra telling Claudia that, sometimes you grow up and things change and you have to grow up with those things. I forget the exact words, but like that repeated theme is really beautiful. But Sarah, I need you to tell me about your debate with your 5-year-old about Vera.
It's less a debate than her just asking me like, what the hell is wrong with him? And we talk a lot about, making your best choices and thinking about consequences and things like that. And so my explanation for her is, she's like, why does he keep doing bad things? Or like, why is he so naughty, basically? And I said, well, I don't think that he is. I mean, I think that he's doing the best that he can, but he's doing it with the most readily available solution, right? He's not thinking through the consequences. And I think one of the best examples of that is when they've risked so much and lost so much to get the heart of the Titan. And then he thinks, oh, well, the queens are in danger. I can help them because I have this magic. And he turns around and rides. And then it's Sarai who realizes that if he dies, the heart of the Titan is useless and they've done all of this for nothing, right? So she has to go. And then the cost for that is that she loses her life. So the way that baby DrBlood and I have talked about it is just that he wants to do good things and he's trying his best, but he's not thinking about the consequences. And I think that is perfectly encapsulated or kind of perfectly mirrored in Claudia and Soren. And that's one of the reasons that I find them so fascinating in relation to him, is like Soren has the impulsivity and the kind of, the always forward progress without necessarily thinking through to the final results. And Claudia has that reflexive move towards magic rather than kind of considering alternative options. And I think the two of them together are very clearly a product of his parentage, or his parenting, which is really interesting. But yeah, so he wants to do good things, but he makes bad choices is sort of the upshot from baby DrBlood.
It's hard to reconcile things like wanting to kill off Ezra and Callum, but I do think the flashback does a lot of work there, particularly the fact that in every instance we see in the flashback of Viren advising Harrow against a decision that ultimately Harrow goes against, something bad happens. The first being the decision to help Durin with the famine problem, which obviously creates an own issue that Viren has to come in and solve with a new solution. Then proposing the idea to go get the heart of the Titan, which obviously goes poorly when Harrow is unwilling to leave the injured behind, and there's death and tragedy because of that. So I can see why, after all these times that Viren has tried to steer Harrow away from a choice that ultimately was a bad one, that he would think that he is the one that has to be making the choices, and he would have to get rid of Ezra and Callum, who are just going to continue to repeat what he sees as a cycle of poor choices that are just creating issues for the kingdom.
Oh, he goes for expediency and finality rather than the nuances of conscience or justice or empathy that inform Harrow's choices, and those are messier, but I think the show is asking which one is better, and like how do you define better.
Yeah, and with respect specifically to his character, you can see how over this time of constantly seeing clearly from his perspective these choices going awry, why he would become kind of hard-hearted and willing to make these kind of sacrifices if it means that whatever ends justify the means outcome he's looking for.
And it's definitely a frustration that I think we see pretty clearly in his dealings with Anya, right? Where it's almost like a microcosm of that same conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Except that in her case, he can write it off because she's young, right? And that's sort of a good reason for her not to be listening to him. But
I am curious, what do you guys feel was her justification or logic for refusing to help him, Anya's?
She just doesn't like the smell of him.
I think it might have been the idea of whenever humans have crossed back into Zadia, that they have experienced some like profound loss. Like they lost 3 monarchs and maybe at least a few guards last time they sent a small party in. If they're gonna marshal an army for an attack, that's gonna come with some serious consequences.
Yeah, I think her argument was like, I can't accept more death on behalf of my people just because like death has happened in the past and potentially might happen in the future, which is, maybe not, I agree with her ostensibly, but I also think that from Viren's perspective, again, he's really like, okay, but this is going to happen. We are going to be invaded. Like, I think he's absolutely genuine when he's like, you guys are going to be really sorry when there's dragons flying over your lands instead of just mine.
I had a slightly different take on it, which was that she might have been willing. Yes, she's going to be hypersensitive to casualties on her side because of what's happened before, but she would potentially take that risk. Like she says, I'm not going to do it on a 2-minute presentation. So it's like, don't Colin Powell me. Don't give me the 2-minute argument with crappy evidence in the UN. Actually give me a proper reason.
Yeah, he had like a fancy map and a story, and that was...
Yeah.
I think that is it, and it is also what Adam said about just not liking the smell of him. She makes this point that she has had counselors and people in her life constantly trying to manipulate her toward a course of action, and I think she does see Viren doing that here, and that's why she is cautious. I think that for me, that's the reason.
I think her innocence and her inexperience actually give her a different perspective from everyone else in the room, because they're thinking along the lines of also political alliances and years and decades of dealing with this, whereas she's just looking at potential cost benefit like
but is
immediately.
She innocent and inexperienced? I mean, it sounds like although she's young, she's experienced a lifetime of
right. I mean, compared to
years.
the other people in the room. I mean,
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that's the sense in which if you're a young ruler and therefore apparently superficially vulnerable, people come at you much harder and faster than if you inherit the throne at the age of, 40 and have sat on it for 10 years, but in a comparative sort of period of stability. I mean, she runs rings around everyone in the room. I mean, they all seem like utter sheep. Yeah, whatever. If we're all doing it, we'll do it, kind of thing. And she rightly points out that that's not actually a decision. I mean, the criticism you could make of her as a character is she's preternaturally wise and collected and unintimidatable, but...
Yeah.
I wouldn't call her innocent or experience.
Well, and the point that she makes specifically is not that she's unwilling even to risk the losses that would certainly come. It's that she won't send her people into unknown danger. And I mean, I think
she just wants to really understand the scope of what's going to happen in the scenarios, and she just needs a bit more evidence, which I get. And I think if you think it's just the former that she doesn't want to risk the lives because of what happened in her past, then actually that does her a disservice, because it makes it sound like almost an appeaser, or that she's projecting her personal pain onto this very political decision. I think there's some genuine wisdom there. Although, because it happens so close together in those final few episodes, her being the wisest person in the room, arguably, and then Ezra taking this amazingly wise decision to go back. And I was like, oh, is this bringing me out a little bit because these decisions are so wise? But
right.
I guess you just have to go with it, I think, a little bit.
Well, I think for me it was less that she was like unrealistically precocious, but the fact that, as you said, Bina, the other monarchs are just like sock puppets basically. They just don't. They have no seemingly wisdom or agency or thought process. They just, as you say, just kind of go with it. And I think that is kind of a tricky kind of trope that can happen with a kids TV show is the stupid adult thing. And those monarchs, as cool as their character designs were pretty
It's sort of like when you ask a group where they want to go to eat, and they're the people like, I don't care, whatever. Yeah, I'll go there. And she's like, look, I'm allergic to fish, so we can't go there.
It just reminded me of the vultures in the End of the Jungle Book animated version. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? Like, it's ridiculous.
Want to go to war? I don't know. You want to go to war? I don't know. Yeah, no, I actually, that was one of my pet peeves with the season, that I thought that the other kingdoms' leaders could have been fleshed out more, and given a little bit more strength either for or against Viren's proposition. But I'm curious if we'll get the chance to see them again, or if it really is curtains for them with these shadow elf things.
Were they meant to assassinate? I thought they were just meant to
give them a reason to come back to the table.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think it's anybody's guess. He doesn't actually say like kill them, but they're also all holding weapons and.
No, but I feel like killing the monarchs is a mistake, because then you have a whole transition of power. You don't know who you're dealing with. Killing like someone in their family, or reaping chaos in the castle makes a lot more sense.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, either way, he is definitely they're supposed to look like Moonshadow elves, right? They're supposed to appear that this is another assassination attempt. Anything else to say about Viren and Aravos?
I just want to point out that I love how much time they took with the mirror stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I come back to a lot, and it's difficult and kind of a bold choice to be willing to take your time with a TV show that has 9-episode seasons that are 20 minutes long. But we get multiple points where there's like minutes long segments of him just staring at the mirror, trying to figure out what's going on, or trying to figure out what the ritual is. And I like that. I like that there's a willingness to slowly progress through that. And as people have said, those were some of the best scenes of the season.
Yeah. Actually, the best compliment I can give to this show is it doesn't feel like it's 9 episodes of 20 minutes. It feels way more involved, and I feel like I spent way more time with these people and with wrestling with these issues, and that, not in a bad way that it stretches out and it's boring, but I think it's amazingly well done. It feels so rich.
Yeah, I agree. I wish they had more time, because I think that there are like even just like little dialogue things that they have to get to, because they have to get a point across, that I think they could handle with slightly more artistry if they had like, I don't know, 50 more minutes or whatever. But like I agree. I think they do a really good job with what they have.
So is
that might have been the issue with the monarchs too, right?
Yeah. Right. No,
because they didn't have time to flesh them out.
Yeah.
Anya was the key character in that scene, so they're just kind of there.
Yeah, and there's a moment in season 1 where it's like where they're at Harrow's funeral, and like the priestess lady is like, "Where's the princess?" I'm like, "You didn't realize this before." Like, I realize you have to have this confrontation here, but you really should have thought like, "Oh, okay, we're about to bury the king. Maybe we should find the kids first."
Oh, I had the same question about Aravos. What the hell is he? He's a Star Touch elf. I know that. And he's the one who unrolls the Zadia map in the beginning. But
It's also the one who narrates the very first story,
yeah.
like about
So
the
is
sources and stuff.
so is he the one potentially who split the map, or do we think possibly like baby Dr. Blood and I, she's a weirdly good at fan theories, which I don't totally understand, but she suggested that maybe
He's gonna be a podcaster.
I mean, right? I know, yeah, it's genetic or something, but she suggested that maybe it was actually Aravos who started dark magic, and that the humans, like the rift between the
he gave it to the humans.
yeah, that like the blame that led to the humans getting kicked out of Zadia and this huge, seismic split that happened, literally and figuratively, is actually his doing rather than a human innovator.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Yeah, I think also it's unclear, it's very unclear and deliberately so, what Callum's ability to do actual primal source magic means. But I think we're kind of meant to suspect that it's not entirely true that humans absolutely cannot, like Lujane says, like absolutely no, you're not connected to the Arcanum and you can't do magic at all. I don't think that's true, and I think that might have been maybe some of his innovation to like spread that and convince people of that and convince the humans of that to turn them toward dark magic.
Yeah.
Well, we do see Erebos hanging out with the other elf leaders in the opening sequence where they decide to separate the humans. So he was clearly a key decision maker there. And the other key hint we get is Runan being freaked out by the mirror. So he has some indication that he knows who Erebos is or what that is, and that it's something terrifying to elves.
Yeah.
So he's clearly done something horrible that they don't like, and he probably got trapped because of it. I just want to say the one last hint of Erebos thing that we have is the cube thing.
The key
Callum has is the key of Erebos that Harrow describes.
Oh, it's of Erebos? Oh,
Yeah.
I completely missed that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I missed that.
That's a link.
There's a lot going on in that letter.
Oh.
It's a long letter.
Yeah.
Well, then I wonder.
Thankfully, you're in the cabin.
I wonder if there's like a dark magic arcanum. Like Lujane presents it as the human's crappy equivalent to arcanum magic, but because there's clearly a dark magic rune on the key, right? So if maybe he's like the dark magic elf, and there's like a dark magic dragon, and you know what I mean? And they kind of try to expunge the idea that darkness is as much a part of primal magic as everything else, rather than an alternative to it.
Yeah. There's so much more to go with the mythology, and it really excites me because I feel like this is like they're not, like, the word arcane just keeps coming back to my mind, and I know it's because of Arcanum, but like it really seems like very kind of eldritch and creepy magic, and I really enjoy that.
Michal, because you have some interaction with the showrunners and creators, do you feel they have the mythos fully worked out, or is this going to end up a bit lofty and we're going to be disappointed? Like, I didn't watch The Last Airbender, so are these people who tend to complete it and know where they're going?
I mean, I think they do. The way they've spoken of it to me is like they have the overall idea and are like they're parceling out. Like they don't know every single detail of the plot. Like they did actually mention to me that Ezran was supposed to go into Zadia, and then they were like, that's not the decision he makes. Like they just realized that was the wrong path for him. But I do think that they have the general mythological arcs. I think they know exactly who Aravos is.
Okay, cool. That's reassuring.
I don't personally think that a creator of that kind needs to know exactly what's going to happen for it to work. They just need to kind of be able to make it work when the time comes. Like, for example, I listen to the behind the scenes podcast they do for Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and it's funny because you would think that with shows like that they would know what they're going to, but they have no idea. Like every new season, they're trying to figure out where it's going to go next, and they have to wrestle with what that's going to turn out to be. And sometimes
amazing.
It works out, sometimes it doesn't.
That's amazing when it works out, but we've all got experiences of shows we've
Oh,
got
yeah.
invested in,
for
right?
sure.
And then I kind of have this new rule that I won't start reading a new fantasy series that isn't already finished, and I kind of found myself getting into Dragon Prince and thinking, oh, but I don't want this to turn into, so that's reassuring to me that I don't have, it's nice that they have enough room to be organic within it, but at least they know the overall framework, which is kind of the best of both.
Yeah, and given the success, I think the cogs of Netflix give them a fair amount of space to tell their story and finish it how they want.
Is this
typically
successful? How do we know? I mean,
well, critical success. I mean, we don't know numbers. Netflix doesn't put those out, but
yeah, I don't know numbers. I know that there was a very packed Comic-Con panel for them at New York Comic-Con. It
feels like no one else I know in England is watching this, but that could just be I don't know the right people.
Yeah, I mean, I from what I've seen online, it does seem to be gaining a following. I think in general with Netflix shows, they kind of, because they are relevant sort of and new for so short a time, I think it takes time to get the momentum going. But I think that there are definitely people who watch and theorize and discuss and debate and ship and get angry and stuff. just based from what I've seen on Twitter.
Okay. Cool. That makes me happy.
So let's do just kind of the general, like the rest of the characters. So let's talk about Amaya. Let's talk about if we have anything else we want to say about Anya, about Sarai and Harrow. I mean, I think they're all great. I love them all. Also, they're all very beautiful.
How does a blind pirate captain a ship alone?
All right.
Oh my God, he's not alone. He has a bird.
He has a seeing eye bird.
Yeah.
He says squawk.
Yeah,
Did you just say squawk?
But even though it's a small boat, isn't that kind of a hard boat to man, with one person, period?
No, I don't know. I don't know about boats.
I feel like sailing, you would require at least a few people to kind of sail safely.
Depends on the size of the boat.
Also,
it's a fairly small boat, but I don't know.
And he clearly knew how to sail before. It wasn't like he became blind and then learned how to sail.
Of course.
Oh, I thought he was blind and just learned how to sail.
No, I think he was a pirate, and then he says something about
he lost his eyes.
Oh, did he?
In the trade.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and he's not sure how he lost his other eye because they came at him from the side that was already blind.
Oh, jeez.
In the words of The Sopranos, you never see him coming.
Yeah.
Maybe Dr. Blood specifically wanted me to mention his narcolepsy. She's like, because I asked her, she's very invested in this. So I was like, what do you want me to talk about or make sure we talk about? And she was like, say about the pirate. And I'm like, oh, you like that? She's like, yeah, he falls asleep all the time. I'm like, you want me to discuss his narcolepsy? She's like, yeah, his narcolepsy. I'm like, yeah, right.
Nice.
So here we go.
We did it.
We did it.
What purpose does it say? It is rando, though, isn't it? But
I love it.
A little bit random.
Yeah, it was totally random. But I was kind of like, he's that kind of character that seems like we could just kind of toss some things in and
Yeah, that's a appeal to the kids.
Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah, those kids in the narcolepsy, man. That's.
Yeah, they love narcolepsy.
Apparently, yeah.
You have evidence of this fact.
Big hit with the under 5 set.
Yeah.
So we touched on Amaya a little bit and her use of American Sign Language. I'm really interested to see what her actual plot is in the show because I feel like something's got to happen there, and I felt like the story at the breach was cut a little bit short, and I'm really interested to see first of all, she does have to come back and save Gren from his tower. Please save my poor baby Gren. But yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts or theories about Amaya?
Well, just one second, just to take it back to the narcolepsy thing for a second. I had to walk away from my child so that he couldn't hear me. But he's 7 and he still finds it hilarious. I just pretend to fall asleep randomly and he buys it every single time. So just saying, Kids love that.
There you go. We know why.
Mystery solved.
But yeah, for some reason he always thinks I'm legitimately asleep. I can't explain it. I'm beginning to worry.
That's amazing. It makes me so happy.
Yeah, I think in
Where is
general the show
Runan?
treats its. Oh, he's in a coin, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it's ballsy not to have him. Like, I mean, he was a cool character. I want to see my Runan back.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, he's the same kind of. I mean, he's like the Ned Stark or the he's like that generation for Rayla, right? Like she was raised by him effectively along or instead of her parents. Like we don't know exactly when her parents disappeared, but there's that very powerful sense that his expectations of her were as shaping a force as Viren's were for Soren, right? And in very much the same direction.
I mean, if this really is truly a Twin Peaks influence, then that may be it for Runan. Which would suck.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
I want to know who else is in those coins, right? Like, because he had a pretty substantial collection by the time he coined Runan, right? So.
Oh yeah, he's done this before.
Yeah.
I have a friend who
every
thinks.
Time I say Viren does this for the best, and he's trying for the best, and then you think he's very aware that he's trapping people's souls in coins and inanimate objects. Yeah. And like, as much as I want to sympathize with him, that's a truly horrific thing to do.
Yeah.
Not to rekindle my Maegor the Cruel.
Maegor the extra, yeah.
Right. I'm just saying, like, he's he could easily be Viren the extremely thorough, but like Viren the inconsiderate of consequences. Like he's working with power and expediency that's untempered by empathy or a long-term picture. Like he's
isn't that almost a definition or a part definition of psychopathy though?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
but you have to think that for dark magic to work, how much like off-screen work goes into this beforehand? How much time do they have to spend gathering and killing and trapping things?
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys think that everyone who uses dark magic has to go through the thing that Callum does, where you have to like face your self in a dream and decide if this is a choice?
I wondered that too.
So I don't think so, because I don't think most people were as conflicted about it as he was. Like he was like, he had turned it down. He had like said no to the dark side, and then he dove in with both feet. And I think that was what inspired that. But like he was still objecting to it on some level. I think, I mean, just to kind of like shift over to themes for a sec, because I think we've touched on this a lot, but this conversation is actually really clarifying for me what a central theme, kind of action and like taking expedient action, even expedient action that seems like extremely necessary and like you feel like you have no other alternative. Mm-hmm. That kind of action, when it's cruel and when it causes suffering, is like looked on extremely skeptically by the show. And I think they walk a really interesting line in that you understand why people take that step. Like we understand why Harrow and Sarai and Viren and the Queens of Durin go into Zadia to kill a creature, who may be sentient, who may be the last of its kind, or all of the things that the argument Sarai makes. And they do that to save their people. But it still kind of turns out to be the wrong choice in the end. And it begins another cycle of violence. And it seems like all of these bad things that people have done for good reasons are very rarely ultimately rewarded. And that's where we come back to Harrow's like amazing speech in the letter to Callum about choking up a little bit about, ignoring, the lie of history and choosing your own path and seeing things in a brighter way. And yeah, I think that's an incredible, like, that to me is actually like a somewhat new thing. I don't know that I've seen it articulated exactly like this in other stories before, certainly not for kids. Like definitely, expediency versus sympathy or empathy and whatever, and right versus wrong. That's familiar, but presented like this, it's an interesting take, I think.
Well, and especially in Sarai's case, because she is the only voice of objection to this plan, right? Like, she is the only one, and she does very vociferously question, what is it that we're sacrificing? And, one of the sort of critical tenets of sacrifice is that it has to be something that costs you. And I think that what Viren is doing isn't a sacrifice, because he's sacrificing on other people's behalf. He's sacrificing other people, right? Or other souls, or other creatures. And she was the voice of that empathy, and hers was the death that most directly resulted from it. But yet she's also commemorated as being, the one holding out the helping hand. So I don't know, like, I think the fact that she was the main casualty of that expedition complicates all of these questions even further. That, like, the first thing to be lost is that speaking voice of kindness, right? That
And I think in other ways that the show is not asking us to accept that the empathetic choosing love decision is the right one, or the one that's going to always lead to the best result in a completely uncomplicated way, because all of this stuff is precipitated by the fact that Harrow himself, and as you say, Sarah, makes a choice to sacrifice other people for the sake of his empathy. He essentially sells out his people to make the empathetic choice to help Durin,
right.
And that forces them to go on Viren's path and to go kill the Titan. So
right.
That is a choice born of empathy that feels wrong to me.
Yeah.
And it also ultimately, because they make that choice, it leads to them killing the Dragon King, which leads us into this mess that we're in at the moment. So I think it's very true. Like, nothing is 100% black and white. And I think, like, also like a lot of it is distilled for me in Claudia. Like, I don't think, like, she doesn't want to, like, destroy this deer. She, like, has a conversation with it, and she's like, you're so sweet and innocent and alive, and I'm sorry. But she does it because she feels that that's her only option. And I think, like, and Callum uses dark magic because he feels that that's his only option at that point. And maybe humanity used dark magic because they felt it was, their only option. So I think that's just a really powerful idea that, like, if you think something is your only option, like, think about it.
Yeah, and I think that's what we see, or what we see hinted at least with Amaya, where it really does seem like the only thing for her to do would be to help Catullus, because Catullus helped them. But in fact, as you say, like, as soon as you really stop and think about it, there's always another option, and it could be that the costs are greater, or that the outcome is less favorable. But at the same time, like, just recognizing the fact that there is always more than one choice, even if those choices are equally difficult, or difficult in different ways. Like, I think the key point is that you have to recognize that there's always a choice. And I think that a lot of the figures we're seeing, whether for good or, for significantly less good, in the case of Viren, that even like a Harrow feels like there is no other choice than empathy or humanitarianism or blind justice, right? But there is always another choice, and I think that's what all of the new generation is learning in these very painful losses that they're experiencing, that they're sort of being forced to reflect on the actions of the people who acted as though there were no other choices, and question for themselves whether that's really the case.
And that it's hard, right? Like, that it's not like you don't look and be like, oh, take a look again. Oh, we have this other option that's, like, way better. It's very, very hard. And I feel like Ezran's probably going to deal with that, going forward. I'm interested to see how that manifests in Zadia, because for the first time, like, Callum is going to be the foreigner, and that's, like, presumably he might actually be in some danger over there, and, like, they might be driven to have to do some things to protect him. I don't know. I'm totally speculating there.
Oh, shout out to Elf Callum instead of human Rayla.
I know, I feel like
I hope they do that.
yeah.
So not to steer us away from, these deep themes to back to Tinfoil Theory Town, but I do think this actually has a pretty significant impact on the way that these ideas play out. Do you guys think Harrow's alive?
Yes.
Okay. So what is the circumstances?
He's in the bird. I think he's in the bird.
I think
Right, I think so
I
too.
think that we're supposed to think that he is. I think that the show has hung such a lantern on that damn bird. Because when Viren is arrested, you see the bird, like they cut away from him to see the bird cage topple over and the bird fly out the window. And my instinct is less that Harrow is in the bird, although I also thought that for a while, and more so that, especially after seeing the pirate's relationship with his bird, which was like such a weird kind of groundwork for them to lay. But what I was thinking is that the bird finds the bird finds Ezrin, and Ezrin can talk to birds, right? So what I imagine is that the bird spent enough time with Harrow and like was his best friend essentially, so that the bird becomes the last piece that he has of his father's voice, rather than like, because it seems to take away from the idea that like, just kidding, your dad's not dead, he's in this bird, just seems a little bit like wah, wah, like
completely agree.
What would be the end game if he saved him in the bird anyway?
Exactly.
That's why I've not understood.
But I think if you don't think about him literally being Harrow, but if he's like essentially the creatural equivalent of the letter that Callum had, I think that would be very interesting. And it also adds a dimension to Ezrin's like Snow White powers, right? That like he can actually hear voices from the past, like through the creatures that he's interacting with. I don't know.
Snow White powers. Yeah. I think that would be the more compelling and subversive choice, to have him be dead. As much as I would like to see a confrontation between Viren and Harrow, I think it makes these character decisions and these themes better to have him gone, and to have the characters that we have now having to take those up and make their own choices. I think that is just a better way of storytelling, but I would not be surprised if he pops up at some point.
I think he's in the bird. I think for us adults, it's lampshaded, but I don't think for like standard viewers, or even if you're just going through it kind of once and not really thinking on a theory level, I feel like it passes muster for a little bit. Yeah, I don't know.
I just think it takes away from everything that.
But I want him to come back.
No, I know. I mean, I can understand why, but I think the another sort of, corollary to the themes that we're talking about with the intergenerational, learn from history but don't be defined by it, is that some of the quote unquote like parental advice that these kids are getting are from their memory of their parents, or their kind of nostalgic, retrojection of the parents that they grew up with, rather than the actual voices of the parents themselves. So we have like Sarai in Callum's dream, we have Harrow in Callum's dream, we have the voice of the letter, but these are all filtered through the child's own memories and perceptions of the parent whose quote unquote advice it is, right?
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more.
Literally saying it's your dream kid.
Yeah.
Well, that's me. Like, there was a lot about that dream that, like, kind of both hit and missed for me on a thematic level. I really liked Alt Callum, but what I think worked for me most was seeing Harrow in chains, and because his whole thing was like unchain yourself from history, and that was symbolically to me very much like, well, I'm in the past now. I'm chained by history because I am history, and like, I don't know. Did anybody else get that?
Not as clearly as you did, but I love that. Thank you for saying that.
Look.
I thought it was more that he had failed to follow his own advice before it was too late. Like that he was chained by expectations, and he is now that way forever because he didn't break free before it was too late for him, but it's not too late for Callum.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. And there's definitely very compelling stuff in terms of like, oh, you don't have a safety net. Like, you don't have a spontaneously reappearing parent who's going to come and save everything. That's a very powerful idea. Um, I don't know. I just think that they're like, on a plot level, I feel like they aren't quite done with that yet. That's my feeling.
I did, as Sarah said, that moment in season 2 where the cage opens and the bird flies away. That as far as trying to parse the clues and things, that moment gave me pause. It just didn't seem like it didn't feel like a person was in that bird at that moment. But maybe I don't know how much agency he has in the bird, so I'm not sure.
Well, I think bait becomes as the second sort of big secret in the letter, that bait likes belly rubs. I think that the part of the expansion on this theme is that the living things that make up your world, whether they're human or elf or, glow toad or Fifi or, all of these, the three-legged wolf, Ava, right? Like all of these living things matter. Even the Titan, right? Like, I mean, that was kind of the thing that Sarai, and they matter on a more perceptible level for Ezrin because he can communicate with them. But they all matter as far as, the sort of dynamics of, ethics and interrelationship with the world around you. And I don't necessarily want to make like an eco-critical point about it. But I do think that we keep being reminded over and over that lives matter, regardless of whether they're human or not. And I think that's part of the upset that comes from the dark magic, is that like, did that deer matter more than Soren to its deer family? Like, probably, you know what I mean? So like, whose perspective it takes priority, I guess, is maybe one of the questions that they're asking.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded of, I think, probably the line that made me like sit up and pay attention to the series in season 1, which is when when they're making that assassin pact, and he said, "Life is precious, life is valuable. We take it, but we do not take it lightly." And that, like, to me, was very much like, oh, okay, like that's actually more of a thesis looking back than I'd realized at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good encapsulation. Yeah.
So, Bina, I'm gonna make you talk about this now. Remind you want to talk about things I've like barely heard of, which is Rawls' Veil of Ignorance and utilitarianism discussed in the flashback. So please,
what are these big words?
Please hold forth on this.
I won't hold forth, but I just thought it was really cool that in the context of a kids show, when you get to the flashback and you have this wonderful king talking about what he hoped to achieve as a king with his wife. And he says he has this dream where justice appears to him and lays down the three things that she holds with her, and he chooses the blindfold. And the idea that you should make laws assuming that you had a blindfold on and you didn't know. If you were totally ignorant of your position in society, how would you make laws? So if you didn't know if you were going to end up being someone with huge inherited privilege or someone utterly poor and with nothing, how would you make laws? And this is called the Veil of Ignorance, and it was posited by John Rawls. He's an American philosopher of, I think, like the 1970s, but he's someone that I read studying philosophy at university. And I just thought this was a wonderful, I mean, like, it's a very specific reference to a piece of philosophy about how one should rule and how one should administer justice. And then later on, I thought this idea of when he's discussing with his wife, we could save 100,000 people, but we have to kill this one thing. Which is like, yes, but is it a, so to say, does it have personhood? Is it intelligent? Does it have a family? And this idea that he's saying, well, it's 100,000 versus one, which is utilitarianism. So you do whatever is for the greatest good. And she's positing an argument, no, but you can't sacrifice the individual. The individual has agency, and you don't have the right to do that. So within that flashback sequence and this conversation between these two rulers, I felt there were some really on-the-nose philosophical discussions in it. It just reminded me of my first year ethics class, and I thought, wow, this is really audacious and wonderful. And yes, kids should be being introduced to some of these topics. But he says, I take the blindfold, I take the veil. And I thought this was really on the nose. And I applaud the series for doing that and talking about what it means to be a ruler. And I think often when you see discussions of this show, it talks about him as being sort of gender non-normative or a different type of masculinity. And that's very true. But you can also see it as debating different types of philosophy around how should you roll. And a lot of fantasy is set in these kind of medieval-ish worlds where it's about a few feudal families or a king protecting power as, being the property of certain famous families who get to exercise it for their own benefit. And he's giving some options that are much more democratic in their tone. And that was kind of cool to me. So that's what I wanted to mention.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I didn't know that was like a established philosophical point. So that's really cool to see them use that, and also fun to see Sarai joke about Lady Justice being naked, because I appreciated that joke.
Absolutely, but it's like the whole. Literally, I spent 4 weeks or something on my first term doing philosophy, doing Rawls versus Nozick. The Rawls. And you could just see that debate that we were having in class was played out between the husband and wife, and I found that fascinating.
Awesome.
Yeah, I just to second that. I mean, I particularly I wasn't aware of the Veil of Ignorance, but that is fascinating that they engage with it so directly. But the utilitarianism argument was one that I found very striking, because it is one that they articulated very explicitly in terms of a non-human creature, right? Where he says it's made of rock. I'd call that a monster. And this idea of, what is normative? What is, is anthropocentrism necessarily the way to go, right? Morally or practically even. I mean, does it make sense to prioritize your own needs above the needs of a creature who is fundamentally very dangerous, right? I mean, can you take on a dragon for the good of your people and still argue that that's for the good of your people, right? So I think it's utilitarianism with a twist because of the non-human and particularly the magical elements that they've introduced into the question. But yeah, it was just beautifully done, and I think raised all of the issues in a way that was equal parts approachable but not at all condescending, which is another part of that balance that I was talking about before, that they're willing to engage their audience on a level that many children shows particularly, and even some adult shows, are very much playing to a lowest common denominator kind of thing. And I feel like they are offering as much and more as people are willing to take out of the show, which is something that I admire very much.
Yeah. And actually that point about animal welfare, this debate about is human welfare necessarily worth more than animal welfare is picked up, so that the heirs of the Rawls Nozick debate are people like John Gray, who's a contemporary English political philosopher, and he's written books about the idea of, what is radical utilitarianism. So should we judge Claudia at all? Is she okay to kill as many baby deers for their hearts to get the dark magics out of them? This is a great ethical, philosophical debate in this show. Mm-hmm. This whole concept of is inherently dark magic because you're utilizing the magics that are in animals somehow ethically worse than the pure, quote-unquote, purer magic that the elves use. Mm-hmm. Is that something we need to challenge? And I think Callum is going to be this really potentially interesting way of challenging some of that, as well as Claudia, when we figure out what his parentage is. Or is it just that we're made to feel that it's worse, that it's dirty and it's naughty, but in a kind of enlightenment world, we can use this energy and do good with it. This is fascinating stuff, and it's in a kids show. It's bonkers. Yeah.
Well, it comes down to whose priorities matter more, or whose priorities should matter more, right? Is it vengeance? Is it familial connection? Is it moral connection? Is it the good of the many versus the good of the few? Is it there are all these conflicting I keep coming back to Jamie and his oath speech, right, where you make all these oaths and you make all these promises and you have all these obligations to so many different groups, both human and non-human in this world, and which of those should take precedent, right, and why? Like, how do you justify making the priorities and acting on them in the way that they do?
Yeah, and I think they do something really smart in beginning the whole show, even because we're not just dealing with sentient humans. We're dealing with also elves and dragons who are equally sentient, and have agency. Because you can see very much like the same calculation going on, among the elves in the early episodes of the show, right? Like, well, what's best for us? Like, is it best for us that we kill this king because we're in the deal with the dragon queen? Like, yeah, okay, that is, and the princes, we're totally gonna kill them, and that's their calculation. And I think the fact that like we're forced into an arena where like it's not just humans making choices for lesser less articulate whatever beings. It's people, other creatures with personhood who are making that choice as well about humans. Really puts it into perspective. And
although John Gray would, I find this idea about free will fascinating, so hence I was really into that theme about how much when the king is telling Ezra and Count, you can break free of history. There's no such thing as fate. You can make decisions. That's very powerful to me. John Gray argues that humans actually don't have free will, and they're all sort of, products of impulses and genetics and, programming, subconscious programming, and that therefore we don't have greater rights than animals, that there's not as much difference between humans and animals. Like, it's very radical as view. It's one of the things he posits in his book Straw Dogs, which I would encourage anyone to read if you want the nihilistic version of modern utilitarianism. But anyway, moving on.
I think we get another very interesting thread in this conversation with Ava, the wolf, and I'm blanking on her writer's name at this point, or her friend's Alice. Yeah, Alice and Ava.
Yes.
But where she says, Lujan says, I never healed her. She never needed this leg. It was people that needed her to have it. And the illusion was enough to, quote unquote, fix her, because she was never really broken in the first place, except in the perception of people, right? Or of other people, if we're taking her as a, but it is very much a question of like whose priorities take precedent, like whose perspective takes precedent. And I think that they're asking this question in so many different ways, and exploring it in so many different ways. And this was something that we talked about in the Black Panther cast too. But one of the things that I really appreciate about the show is that it raises all of these questions in a way that doesn't feel, pedantic or kind of, very, lectury, but it also doesn't answer them in any way that's pat or comfortable. It doesn't say like, well, Viren's definitely wrong, or Ezrin's definitely right, or, well, Ezrin's right most of the time, I think, at least up to this point.
At least for now.
Anyone's going to be, but that, the fact that the elves were not acting on their own, that they were hired by what's effectively a grieving mother who believed that her husband and child had been murdered by another group pursuing their own vengeance for cyclical wrong, that all of these questions are left so not even gray, like they oscillate between, black and white and purple and red, and that there's just this this kind of chaos of possibility, but none of the possibilities emerges as right or wrong in a way that we can comfortably define it in world, which is, again, while still in the context of a show that's enjoyable for, a 5-year-old who's obsessed with it, which is, it's kind of like mind-boggling the more you think about how much they've put into what they've done.
18 episodes also.
That's true. Yeah, on Lujan, the illusionist, I found the way that they handled her sort of philosophy on how perceptions shape our reality and how they practically are our reality is how we perceive things, and an illusion is real if we believe it to be real. These are pretty deep and intense ideas, and pretty fraught ideas for the current contemporary moment, the fake news era that we live in. So I thought that the approach to that was also very interesting, and what's cool about it is that I don't have a clear positive or negative reaction to that character in the way that she described things. I don't think that there's an easy way to rule on whether or not she's right there.
But they illustrate it so beautifully. I mean, and so simply, but also in a very, like with the food, right? Where Ellis could have cared less when she realized that it was an illusion. She's like, this is the most delicious illusion pie I've ever had, and like, whereas Callum was physically ill once he realized that the illusion was in fact an illusion, even though what he had still looked like an apple, right? That, I don't know, it was, and then the animals were just eating bowls of grub, and they didn't even need the illusion to make it a delicious, satisfying meal. And I don't know, it was really well played out in that very kind of limited vignette that we had around the dinner table.
Oh yeah, I mean, even with Claudia's death pancakes, right? Like, they're all like, these are the greatest pancakes in the world. Like, I've never had anything like this. She's
but
like,
at what
yeah,
cost?
like, I killed a bug or whatever to make them, or whatever her spell was, and suddenly they're all disgusted. I think that's a really interesting point that I hadn't really considered before, like that. What I think is also really great about the show is that I don't feel like the answer is the same for everybody. I think that, like, Callum and Ezrin are, for example, different people, and they have different conclusions about things, and that's totally fine. Obviously we have that pattern with Viren and Harrow, who are approaching things from very, very different points of view. I think we might come down more ultimately against Viren's ideas, but I don't think we're meant to see him as like crazy. Certainly for the Titan idea, like that's not like, it's a bad thing, but it's not like, it's very,
especially because it worked, right?
Exactly, it did work, yeah.
I'd be so fascinated to see how Harrow and Sarai's arguments would have changed if instead of going to kill a Titan, they would have had to go kill a Sunfire elf who wielded the heart of a Titan. It would be so interesting to see how both of their arguments change.
Or to destroy the egg, or like how inhuman is inhuman enough for it to be okay, right? Like,
and the kind of other side of it is, if you lack the agency over your own life, like, is there something inherently more cruel about killing something that, like the deer, that doesn't really, can't stop you or can't fight back? Like, that's the other aspect
that's
of that
really interesting, because when they find the Titan, right, they think it's dead. And they're like, oh, okay, all right, this moral choice was taken away from us, we don't have to deal with this anymore. And then they realize that it isn't dead, and they have to engage in that again, and they almost don't have a choice because they've already started attacking the thing.
Right. Well, that's the other thing too. Yeah, like if you provoke a war, are you still killing without justification? Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, if they had killed it while it was, and Soren says that too. He's like, I've never killed anything that was sleeping. And she was like, well, do you want me to wake her up? Like, how awake does she have to be for it to be a fair fight, Soren? And it's kind of this absurdist moment, but then it is very much an echo of what happens with the Titan, where it's like, okay, well, let's just, mine its heart. Like, we don't have to think about it. And then by the time they've already engaged, antagonistically, but then it's okay for them to kill it because it's trying to kill them, right? So like,
but then it even all this goes back to, like, the very, very beginning origins of this conflict that we don't really fully understand, right? Like, because everybody's ultimately acting because, like, oh, well, you exiled us from this place, and that's why we had to use dark magic, and like, oh, well, we exiled you because you were using dark magic, and you and it's very, like, it's just super powerful to me, and it seems super relevant to just modern conflicts and the way you approach them and understand them. Yeah, I'm very into it. As couldn't be evidenced by our 2 hour podcast.
Right. I think too, just kind of along these same lines, I think that pairing Viren with Erebos is a very interesting move, because even the very, very little that we know of Erebos, it's pretty clearly like taking Viren from the far end of the spectrum, if you're thinking like Sarai, Harrow, Viren, and making Viren like the moderate, right? So suddenly Viren is stuck between, probably Harrow, if you want to think of, as his like moral compass point or whatever, like Harrow, Viren, Aravos, and the ground has shifted so that he is in the middle, possibly being drawn towards an even more extreme, which he seems on some level to be resisting, which is very interesting.
Well, that actually, I mean, that just crystallized something for me, in that Aravos, I suspect, might just be the ultimate, like, he doesn't only seem like the ultimate antagonist, he seems like the ultimate utilitarian. Like, he seems very much like, I am the most powerful, I am the alpha human, person, being, and I can use these things as I see fit. And like, to me, that, and hey, look, I'm stuck in a mirror. What do you expect me to do? So,
actually, the person who Aravos most reminded me of was not so much a utilitarian, and maybe this is too much of Catholic religion plus, reading Milton, but it was the fallen angel who decides to give sort of free will and knowledge to humans and corrupt them, quote unquote, but liberate them also. Like, if he really is the person who invented dark magic or decided to,
as maybe DrBlood
monopoly, break the monopoly on magic that the elves seem to have, and give it to equalize the battle between elves and humans, then to me that is very Milton Paradise Lost, which may or may not be another conscious reference that the showrunners are using.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
I was struck by the fact that he seemed almost relieved to be in communication with another. I mean, so you almost got the impression that he was lonely in the mirror, but was he lonely for company, or was he lonely for something to corrupt and manipulate, right? And I think they leave it very ambiguous as to he's like, I haven't damned anybody's soul in quite some time. I feel,
I feel like it's got to be a combination.
A vengeful elf leading humans or manipulating humans into going to war with the elves that he's pissed off with, and that's satanic. And is Satan an evil person or just a revolutionary leader? Discuss.
Yeah. Or
we'll save that for another podcast. We've been going 2 hours.
Like, would Milton's Satan have become Milton's Satan if Milton's God hadn't been the authoritarian that he was, right?
Exactly. But that's my point. Like, this is my point. That who would have predicted that 2 hours into a podcast about a kids animated show with 20-minute long episodes, we've touched on utilitarianism, Rawls Veil of Ignorance, and flipping Milton and Paradise Lost and the meaning of the fall. I mean, this show it's something else, right? I mean, this isn't normal in the context of discussing kids animated shows.
I'm gonna message the showrunner and be like, we decided your show is not normal.
Congratulations.
Yep. You're kind of a weird show.
Yeah.
You guys are kind of weird showrunners.
All right, so I think we should probably wrap up. Are there any of the lingering questions that we want to touch on?
I did promise Dr. Blood that I would raise one more issue, and that was where, just sort of, paraphrasing it a little bit, but where Zim fits in as far as like the relationship between humans and dragons. So her two questions were why they didn't just turn Zim over to the fire dragon and let her bring him back to his mother.
Good question.
Because he could communicate, he could talk to her enough to know that she was scared and she needed protection. But like, why wouldn't he just like, hey, we have this, here's your prince. You want to go ahead and take him back? Because clearly there was a moment where the dragon acknowledged exactly who he was.
I actually love that moment, because that moment to me was like, I'm really angry. I'm going to turn around and kill this guy. Oh my God, it's you. Holy shit, I have to tell your mom. Bye.
Right, but like, is that it? And then why wasn't she more invested in like making sure that, I don't know. So I feel like maybe they're walking into some kind of like dragon factionality that we're not really clear on. And that relates to maybe Dr. Blood's second question, which is, what does the sun dragon want? And will he take Zim away from them? Because he seemed to be like one of the big 5 or whatever, like one of those, the elemental dragons.
Very
and
perceptive questions. I feel baby Dr. Blood should be on this podcast. Really, you should take.
These are insane
Like,
questions.
I'll just tell you, and you tell me. I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
If you want to
take
record
nothing
like
to
a little thing
question.
with her, Sarah, and just like send it to me, I will absolutely put it on the end of the episode
I'll
if you're
ask her.
okay sharing that. But
I'll ask her. Yeah.
Good literary criticism coming from this kid.
yeah. So well, in terms of like why the Sun Dragon, like I don't know why why the Red Dragon didn't like just see Zim, but I do think that from the show's perspective, that's not going to work because it's really just important that like again that almost theatrical idea of like the human princes who are the children of the people who have been killed by the dragons and the elves, returning this thing that they were killed for, whatever. I think that's like really critical. Maybe she was just like injured and she was injured, so maybe she couldn't like fly and with him. I don't know.
Or with them, I don't know. But, yeah.
I'm super invested in this theory now that the Red Dragon serves a splinter faction of dragons that are working actively against the tyranny of the Dragon
Oh,
King.
damn.
I like
Yes.
this a lot.
See, I thought
this
that it
a
was
lot.
something maybe that like they didn't all get along or something. I mean, it wasn't clear, but I think at the end of the season, with that kind of being the oh shit moment, like that seems to be what they're alluding to.
Well, yeah, because the Dragon Queen is very shadowy, isn't she? I mean, all we know about her is that she hired the elves to assassinate Harrow. But like, yeah, I don't know. But,
Yeah. Well, we've never seen her. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, they're like, oh, it's Zim's mom. It's Zim's mom. Like, we have to go find her. We have to assume she's gonna, like, is she gonna be happy to see him? Like, is there another egg? Like, has she, is Zim the heir anymore? Has he been, like, is he the
It
stepchild?
would be kind of disappointing, right? If Zim shows up and all the factions of Zadia kind of like kumbaya and like accept Zim as the leader and like that's it. Like it'd be more politics there would be.
And it would also abandon the sort of sins of the father, either visiting or being evaded by the son, right? So if in fact Thunder was a tyrannical leader and people were on some, or dragons were on some level like happy to see him go, like are they all going to uniformly welcome back his son and heir, or is it potentially like are they walking into are they fooling themselves to think that that it will be that easy to not only resolve the conflict between humans and elves, but that everyone will be so relieved that Zim is back because presumably things have unfolded since he was presumed dead, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be that complicated, but I do definitely, now I'm like really, I agree. I think it would be very cool if there was parallel fractiousness on the side on the magic side. Because, I mean, we haven't actually really seen any elves interact that are like different kinds of elves, right? Like we haven't seen Sunfire elves interact with Moon Shadow elves or...
Yeah.
So we don't know if they get along or if they're just like, ugh, those guys.
Yeah.
Like,
I feel like Zim's mom is going to be real scary, you guys. Like,
yeah.
I think we're getting a picture of her based on the assumption of the characters that we've spent the most time with. But I feel like in a very George R.R. Martin kind of move, like the very fact that that's their go-to assumption kind of suggests that it's not correct.
Well, she's also very crafty, right? Because she wasn't just like, oh, I'm gonna crash over this border and like fry the king myself. She hired the elves who can turn invisible.
Yeah.
It is also so weird and creepy that they both slept with like arrows. Is the mirror there?
Listen, listen, I moved recently, and I know that when you have a mirror, you don't just throw out the mirror, okay? You use the mirror.
Yeah.
In terms of what Sol Regum wants, I have decided that he just wants a taco and a coffee break. Is
that what you want?
Maybe.
I could use a taco.
Yeah, right. Dragons love tacos, so.
Yeah, that is a
Yes.
Yeah. It is.
My
the
son
parents
likes that.
were like, oh yes. All right, so I think we are gonna wrap it up there. Hopefully season 3 will be out soon, or at least announced soon. I really, really hope so.
When do you think it will be out? Was there like a classic? What was the gap between 1 and 2?
5 months, I think.
Yeah, the show came out. Hang on, I'm trying to remember.
It was November.
Yeah, it was November, and then it was earlier than that because they announced season 2 at New York Comic Con, which was in October.
It was before Halloween. It was like early October because there was some last minute panic as to whether I'd have to generate a Rayla costume. I did not end up doing, thank God, but
bad Scottish accent.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Just be human, Rayla.
You don't have to have a Scottish accent. She doesn't.
Like floppy gloves and a hood. I could have done that.
Oh, the shade, I love it. Yeah, but so that was like, it was fairly brief, but like they keep emphasizing to me that they don't know if Netflix is gonna like renew them for another season. And I'm just like, okay, but obviously they have to. Like they have to renew you guys for another season.
Yeah, I thought the impression was that they were already working on it, but I mean
they are. Like it's in the works. I think it's like all because they couldn't have thrown the season together that quickly.
I'm a human just waiting for the next season on Netflix.
But anyway, yeah, I hopefully it won't be long. But we'll obviously keep in touch with that. If you would like to share your thoughts on The Dragon Prince season 1 and 2, you can get in touch with us on theokpodcast.com, which is where this episode will be in audio form. Obviously, also iTunes. You will be able to find it probably on YouTube. And if you are listening to this on YouTube, don't leave jerky comments. Be better. Be better. Be best. And we're also on Twitter. And if you really want to get involved with us and get like knee deep in the nerdy, find us at the Podcast of Ice and Fire forums. You have to join up and then scroll down to the Vassals of Kingsgrave section. And then if you like, you can podcast with us. For 2 hours on a Sunday about a kids TV show. Because that's what we do here.
You probably could have watched season 2 in the time it's taken us to talk about it.
That's very true.
But could you also have read Paradise Lost?
Oh, Christ alive. Yeah. Quite literally, right? Paradise Lost gives me the shivers. It's like reading Not Pamela, Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. I think the 2 most rewarding but painful things I had to read as a student.
On that note, we're going to say goodbye.
Too much information.
All right. Thank you for listening, everyone. And I feel like I wish I knew how we said goodbye in Elvish or something, but I don't. So.
#Greg with me.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, fella humans. Bye, human fellas.
Goodbye.